Wyndham. It's August 29th, 2022. This is my commentary on the Diane tape so far. Tape 1, titled 315.1.mov. Re-uploaded September 13th, 2019. I learned from a higher-up named Mr. Too Cool that Lee Harvey Oswald was a patsy. This would imply that the CIA somehow could have engineered the coincidences delineated in the Buddy Stratcher song. They made sure Lincoln and Kennedy were assassinated 100 years apart, and that both presidents had the same number of letters in their names, same with the patsies. This would imply that the CIA is trying to make us believe that history is repeating itself, down to the very last detail, or at least there continue to be coincidences that far down the rabbit hole. Perhaps to decrease our sense of agency, thus reducing the likelihood of rebellion. Or not. Maybe the CIA had no idea about the number of letters in Lee Harvey Oswald's name. Maybe that was all swim, right under their noses. But when a group gets to wield so much power that you have trouble telling them apart from swim, let's just say you know you're in trouble. Bullet point. One of the coincidences that Dale initially found between him and Earl Hamilton was that the number of years between Earl and Adolf Hitler and the number of years between Dale and Trump were reversals of each other, 74 and 47. But he never asked the question, what effect did Earl Hamilton have on Adolf Hitler? None, obviously. Hamilton was an artist, he was American, and he had the same level of power in politics as we do. None. Dale wrote that right after Trump got elected, and everyone was acting like it was the end of the world, which it was, and still is, but we didn't realize how slow it was going to be. Now our president is so boring he could do anything. No matter how bad, how horrific the thing is. Like something as bad as, I don't know, being a pedophile. He could get away with it because barely anybody could bring themselves to notice or care. It's genius in its own twisted way. Bullet point. As is probably apparent now, our Dale is not the Dale from Invitation to Love. The Invitation to Love names are code names, but there is a certain similarity between them. Something about their childlike purity. But you wouldn't guess that from our Dale's art, which is intensely lowbrow and vulgar. We extend our sincerest apologies to anyone who might still be listening to this because they thought it was Invitation to Love fanfiction. It is and it isn't. Bullet point. Dale has changed quite a bit since the first tape as well. He was hopelessly embarrassed of his detailed descriptions of our costumes, thinking they sounded too much like My Immortal, a famously bad Twilight fanfiction, until he found a book online called Dead God, where the author uses the same technique, which lifted his spirits because he started to see the coincidence as a crucial moment of synchronicity. Bullet point. Dale says Nikita is the love of his life. I am somewhat skeptical that loves of lives exist, but I have spent a lot of time with Nikita and it has not only been fun but intellectually stimulating and highly productive. Nikita, like anybody else, isn't perfect, and perhaps saying someone is the love of your life is a bit naive, but all things considered, they seem to be a good match. Fingers crossed, knock on wood, etc. Tape 2, titled 315.1.mov. September 3, 2019. Bullet point. There are a few things we are retconning. A time machine the DIA has in our collection of stolen technologies has made this possible. If other people listening to this remember the name of our city from previous tapes, the name of our city has always been undisclosed, and if you remember anything else, it is probably a result of the Mandela effect. Bullet point. When we first wrote about a genre of ambiguous fact and or fiction by insane narrators, and by extension the authors, we had no idea what we were getting into. We didn't know we were already doing it. We hadn't yet felt the terrifying vulnerability, the strange impulsive masochism that comes with it. Now we understand, but of course, it's too late. Bullet point. I am compiling a list of everything I find in this genre, and everything we consider with the gravity of religious doctrine. I will post it in the archives. Bullet point. I think it was the second Tuesday of July when I found the book, the day my coworker died because of a problem with his pacemaker. I watched the paramedics give him one electric shock after another, his lifeless head rhythmically hitting the pavement. Later that day, I randomly chose to put on an audiobook, Realistic Feeling by Joan Didion. It's about the death of her husband, who also died from a problem with his pacemaker, which I had no idea about until I started listening. If we're counting the good coincidences, isn't the only way to continue in good faith by counting the bad ones as well? I had been thinking about, but kept writing it off as just my effigy. Still, effigies must be worshipped every so often for their libido to stay intact. You don't want to get on their bad side. Bowing down to my effigy, I noticed a binder at my feet. Trauma Intervention Program, it said on the cover. I opened it and examined its contents. 300-some pages of strange poetry and pictures of the author in a Japanese no-theater Hanya mask and plain white bodysuit with a picket sign that said, standing in various liminal spaces. Following the poetry is a much more systematic narrative, providing a framework in light of which the poetry can be interpreted. I knew immediately that this was one of the related parts of the project that Dale predicted we would come across. I felt like Swim had finally provided me with something concrete, meaningful, even after all the times I had said I was giving up on them. I will never uncross my fingers. The Are You OK had a meeting and decided to carefully annotate each page, sharing our thoughts with ourselves and each other and the original author. We were quite a ways in when Nikita mentioned that we should probably contact the original author about posting it online. To our relief, her response was, "Go wild." I will post a link to the aforementioned work in the description of this video. So far, the Diane tapes has only been a narrative of the chronology of the project, but this document will be a piece of the project itself. Bullet point. We are retconning the term tripping from being under the influence of Obical-P to adventuring. We apologize again for this inconvenience. We will do our best to make the situation never have happened. Bullet point. This part is a little embarrassing to admit, but it turns out the reason Taryn Zamora was being so nice to me was that he actually had a crush on me. We got together for a while, but he started to say things like, "I love you," and I started to say things like, "I don't have time," and the next thing you know, we were getting into screaming matches every time we saw each other. It's like our relationship ran the course of an entire multi-month-long relationship in under 2 weeks. Hank, I thought. But I wasn't sure until I found out he had been put on probation for possessing topless photos of a minor who was staying with him at the time. This was under a month after we broke up. Definitely Hank, I thought. This time I could see it coming, though. That's why I wasn't so sure. I was worried I was projecting Hank onto Taryn, but most of the time I had bigger things to worry about, like what I would say to hurt him during a recurrent screaming match. Before we broke up, I managed to get the contact info of this girl who was always bitching about being a psychopath and simultaneously trying to sleep with. She sounded like someone with whom I'd get along. When I met her, we hit it off right away, and her partner told us about the things Taryn had said about me and Nikita, and we, in turn, regaled them with everything Taryn had told us about them. Turns out everything Taryn/Hank ever told us was a lie. As it turns out, I was wrong about people feeling as though they could trust Taryn. No one was surprised that he was a pathological liar. As it turns out, I was one of the very few who temporarily bought into his bullshit. I can barely listen to the Diane tape where I talk about it. Not only a humiliating example of seeing the world through rose-colored lenses, but apparently needing to shout it from the rooftops only to be met with a rude awakening a week later. In the future, I will definitely have to be more careful about who I endorse on these tapes. Sometimes it almost seems cursed. As soon as I mention someone, our relationship seems to go awry. But how do I avoid mentioning those who are important to me? I don't know. Suffice it to say that Hank and I will not be forming a band, and he will absolutely not be considered a leader. 4. 67.mov, September 3rd, 2019. No comments in particular. 5. 67.1.mov, September 13th, 2019. Probably because we've been retconning and de-retconning this particular detail so much, going back and forth from blonde to red, Diane 2's hair has finally turned out to be a sort of medium strawberry blonde. The real Diane had red hair, a carrot top. Dale was trying to put everything in reverse by reversing minor details like hair color, because, well, everything's backwards. But Swim rejected this detail because hair color, as it turns out, is not a minor detail. I mean, think about it. One of the first things we see when we look at someone is their hair color. Diane probably had her whole life shaped by, among other things, the fact that she was a redhead. So Diane 1 couldn't be blonde, but Diane 2 was different. Although Diane 1 was her main source, like all of us, she has multiple sources of DNA. Some from that ex-roommate who I unfortunately couldn't be friends with because she hated you, for reasons she wasn't able to describe. Why her? Not a clue. And some more DNA from a synthetic girl. Bullet point. I'm not sure what I was doing accusing Diane of being basic so aggressively. As if being basic is the worst thing a person could do, or as if society was giving her any other choice. What does that even mean, being basic? I normally wouldn't work with such ill-defined terms. I don't even know if Diane did become basic, but I wrote those things to get a rise out of her. And it didn't work, because of course it didn't. Diane was always too mature for those kinds of games. Even at the time, I think I knew it was useless, but I still wanted to try. Still, it wasn't as though I could give Diane an alternative to being basic. Diane had every right to leave Dale because she was done with the DIA and just wanted to be a normal person. and maybe that's what she did. Or maybe it was Dale specifically she couldn't stand to be around. And other than that, her life now is exactly the same. Living with her parents, working at an ice cream store, doing puzzles, going to college courses, and wanting a dog. Either way, I don't hate Diane now. And the only reason I ever did was because I could see Dale in pain and I needed to do something about it. And maybe I did. Flamboyant Armstrong says, "Anger gets shit done." And maybe that's when Diane too rose from the flames of my rage like a phoenix. A quiet phoenix. I'm also embarrassed about saying that incel shit. I'm not like that anymore. I also might believe in doppelgangers. I still don't feel like I do, but when they're right there in front of me, I have to admit, I guess I was wrong. Maybe doppelgangers are one of those things that you can't believe in until you see one, and you can't see them until you believe. Taking a leap of faith, as they say. Bullet point. Also, Terrence said people are cursed to have the same thing happen to them over and over, but since we found out everything he said is a lie, maybe that isn't the case after all. Bullet point. The parts I was the most embarrassed about were the Rick and Morty references. But then, well, remember how I said Diane was more of a Beth than a Jerry? And Nikita guessed that Beth was a clone? Well, it turns out we were half right. There was a Beth clone, but nobody ever knew which was the clone and which was the original. Beth became a badass, and so did the clone. Just like Diane, who could be out there, the same person as before. And Diane, too, her clone, who is definitely a badass from what she's been through so far. So our lives do kind of match up with the show. I'm not saying it means anything, I'm just saying it's a coincidence. And I keep track of coincidences. 6. 67.2.mov, September 3rd, 2019. I will talk about the fucking witches, okay? But just not now. I'm not strong enough. I'm not stupid or lazy. I'm just not capable of doing it right now, okay? Just not right now. Bullet point. You may notice some words that were uncensored before that are censored now. Normally I would go back and change the old tapes, but I don't know if that's allowed. Again, we're sorry for the inconvenience. Bullet. Now that I've removed my rose-colored lenses, I think it's time to say some things about Anthony Finn. The first being that we said he was functional enough to be seen as sane, but how did we know all that? It's more, now that I think about it, that even if people thought that Anthony was insane, they really didn't mind the insanity, or in some cases they may have even liked it. In the case of Dale and I, we thought, wow, an adult who isn't so boring. But Anthony told Dale and I stories from his life, and one of them was about when he woke up in bed next to an angry Japanese girl, who he had promised he was going to marry blacked out the night before, and how he left and probably broke her heart. Another was when he and his then-girlfriend tried to kill themselves together. And at the last minute, Anthony got worried she wouldn't have it in her, so he held her head down underwater in the San Francisco Bay, thinking that he would kill her and then himself. Luckily, he was unsuccessful, probably because they were both drunk. The point is, I talked about Anthony like he was this upstanding example of a moral person. And maybe he was, but that's only who he was when we knew him. And he was old at the time. So I don't know if I'll read and transcribe all of Anthony's stuff. Maybe that step will simply never find its way into the project. Who cares, Hank? Seriously, who cares? But did you have to be everywhere? Whatever. My thaumaturgy will destroy you. Just you wait. Sorry. Sorry, Anthony. Bullet point. I also claim Swim can't order us any material objects. You'd think someone so powerful would have, any money. So I had been pointing this out to Swim, who is ideologically against money, but they have also started looking at themselves and wondering if they really are who they've been programmed to think they are. Some things in Swim's story just don't add up, and Swim seems just as confounded by the logical inconsistencies as we are. No attempt at a cover story. It's like they have implanted memories or something. Swim has demonstrated their power to me, though. This must have been about a year ago when I was back at my job, thinking to Swim about how much more convenient it would be for them to put a really obvious sign out there to prove they're real, rather than just a coincidence here, an Obicalpi adventure there, and so on. This was one of those ridiculous requests that I never expected to get. But then right in front of me, I saw this book. It was called The Departure, just like the last season of Invitation to Love. The cover had a pink chair on it, like Be Here Now, and like the chair we saw at the ghost town. And the whole thing was bathed in pink light, which is PKD's color for Valis. So I pick it up and start reading, and the blurb says this. Diane is missing, but Rom knows Diane better than anyone, and she feels in her bones that her best friend is out there, and that one day she'll come back. And she's right. 2 years to the day Diane went missing, she reappears with no memory of where she's been or what happened to her. There were a lot of coincidences, although Diane's character in the book was more like Dale or even Professor Ignatz, whereas Rom was more like Diane. Either of the Dianes, I suppose. At the end, the whole world seems like it's being ripped apart at the seams, the spiderweb stitches stretching away like glue. Diane came back to life because Rom wouldn't let her go. But this Diane was changed, a walking corpse falling apart, trying to cover it up. She finally tells Rom what happened, when they're alone because everyone else has run away. Diane didn't like the life she was living in a small town, taking care of her immature husband. She wanted to get away from it all, just for a day, to go to Acadia National Park. Ironically, because she didn't even like hiking. She gets lost, anxiety slowly increasing until she notices what seems like a shadow person stalking her. Shadow person being my words, not the author's. The creature has bark for skin with a twisted black hole for the face. It consumes her, tears her apart, but she realizes she isn't dead. She's in limbo, on her way to becoming one of them. But she wants to take Rom with her. At first, when she explains, she thinks Rom will go willingly. Rom thinks Diane was taken because she was alone, pretty, and blonde. But Diane is convinced it's her destiny, excitedly reminding Rom that she always felt like she was different and wanted to be famous. But when it's clear Rom wants to stay in the normal world with her friends, Diane gets aggressive, and Rom asks her why, and she admits she can't help it. Somehow Rom gets away, and she leaves the creepy hotel forever. I'm guessing the plethora of coincidences is fairly obvious. Dale and Diane's roles are switched, of course. From Dale's perspective, his big adventure and its aftermath felt like destiny, but to Diane it must have felt like a nightmare. I looked up the author to find that she is a bona fide witch, all of her Instagram posts being about witchcraft. Tape 8, 5.mov, April 15th, 2020. I realized in my letter to Earl Hamilton I referred to Dale as my conjoined identical cousin. I should clarify that Dale and I aren't always conjoined, but I thought our access to high-end technologies might impress Earl Hamilton. Impressed or not, he never responded, and I doubt he ever will. At the time, I cited the fact that the members weren't attending service as one of the reasons why the place gave us a bad feeling. But that honestly could have just been my attempt at rationalization. I suspect the bad feelings Dale and I got from the Grey Lodge were legitimate when it came to the aesthetics, but there are several problems we had that would have been inevitable under the rule of the Black Iron Prison. Maybe Earl and Dorian Hamilton weren't trying to do anything that deep. They were just trying to make a buck doing some art, knowing they could sell it to the liberal elite, and that was all they ever really wanted. Or maybe they wanted to do more but didn't know how and had to compromise with state or federal. Or maybe they're just a big old front for Obical Pete. Or maybe Earl Hamilton doesn't have as much power over his organization as we thought he would. Who knows? 9/3/15/3.mov, April 19th, 2020. We should have known it would be a virus. We were using it as a metaphor all the time. Language is a virus from outer space is one of the things Mom says via Hans Palmer, who got it from Prince Groundhog, Duke of Cambridge of the CCRU, because of course she did. Just is one of Nikita's favorite books, also one of Hank's. But Hank never had bad taste. He was just a bad person. Or whatever he was. Is, I guess, because he's still out there. Anyway, we should have known it would be a virus. Parasite had just come out. And I was writing all these poems about how everyone always prepares for a large opponent, but no one ever thinks that they could have one like me, that's so small you can't see it, and hides inside your bones. When you get down to the bone, you haven't got all the way yet. There's something inside the bone, the marrow. That's what you gotta get at. That's what Hank would always say to me. And suddenly, there was this virus, and we found Professor Ignatz looking severely neurodivergent at a food mart, talking and cackling to herself. We told her that she was in the DIA, and she said she already knew. And that's roughly when she joined the Are You OK? We should have known it would be a virus. And some people did know, but they couldn't do anything about it. So why would we? If we had known it would be a virus, all we would have gotten to do was say, I told you so. The spirit of the staircase. It's better that we didn't know. 10. The square root of 5n.mov. August 16th, 2020. The only comment I have about this will be best left for the next tape. Signing off now. Paige.